Dreadful, Chapter 3, Session 9. He woke up from a dream of jeering voices and pelting rocks. He couldn't tell if it had been a memory or a warning, but the sense of shame and fear clung to him as he clawed his way free from the pillows. He had left the window open overnight, and the sunlight spilling through made the dust on the scarlet bed curtains embarrassingly obvious. He tried to remember the details of the dream, hoping they would contain some clue to his past. Where had he come from? How had he gotten here? What was he trying to do? In the dream, he had been surrounded. The ground had been dusty, covered with scattered pebbles. A few shoots of grass poked up, trying to survive in an environment that actively wanted them to die. The vividness startled him. Surely he couldn't have produced it alone. The other boys had shoes. His feet were bare. They didn't want anything from him except his fear, maybe. If they had wanted something, he could have tried to give it to them. The ringleader stood behind him, chanting something. His name? That slipped from his memory even as he grasped for it. He had turned, eyes still on the ground, to see the dusty claws. His eyes had followed up the bony legs, the frills, to see a man-sized version of the bird skeleton from the study. It had clacked its beak with menace. It had worn Orla's kitten apron. He flopped back on the bed, hopeless. "My lord?" he groaned. "Go away." He couldn't face another round of Gerbeetle trying to dress him. Not right now. The door closed softly to his relief. He couldn't lie here, though. Time ticked away, with or without his consent. Zarakonar expected things of him, and the only way to make sure he did not end life in an ironic fireball of his own was to figure out what those things were and provide them. And that meant that today would involve a great deal of reading. He finally decided to stop. He had been reading most of the day, and he knew many new, or rather new to the current him, and horrible things. He knew how to boil an undefended man's blood, specifically in his skull, so that it would cook his brain and release steam from his ears. He knew how to shape that steam into cunning little shapes, such as skulls or spirits, so as to further terrify onlookers. He knew that in a very far away swamp, whose location he had detailed directions to, none of which meant anything to him, there lived a certain kind of worm that, when ingested, could cause a person to grow horns from their head that would subsequently emit a poisonous gas that could easily kill a goat. He knew there were 3 cures for cow burps and had no idea why the writer had not stopped at 1 or 2. He also discovered a spell for permanently changing the features of one's face. He could find, unfortunately, no way of telling whether he'd actually cast any given spell. He flipped up the cloth to stare at himself in the mirror. If this was not his original face, maybe that was why it felt so unfamiliar? If he could not even trust the face in the mirror, how was he supposed to ever figure out who he really was? He drummed his fingers on the edge of the glass. Who else might have known him? There were 2 other wizards Zarakonar had mentioned, mentioned Zaxus and something. Valavena? Valavena? He could call one of them. See what information he could tease out. But what if they guessed? What if? He slammed his hand down in annoyance at himself. Enough dithering. He called out the words to make the connection before he lost his nerve. Lightning flashed across the surface, and it started to glow. It occurred to him that just a little bit of thinking would have made it a lot easier to steer this conversation in a useful way. No, crap, how do I break the spell? He had just enough time to assume a sufficiently casual pose in the chair before the other wizard appeared in the mirror. Not a wizard, a sorceress. If the princess had been lovely, the sorceress was the kind of stunning that made men's minds melt. Shiny, gently waving hair, so pale it was almost white, tumbled past her shoulders and down out of the frame. It was held in place with a silver diadem, the center of which held a brilliant emerald. Thick lashes, far too dark for her hair, framed enormous violet eyes that blinked at him languidly. Her perfectly shaped lips were open just a fraction. The matching green robe she wore plunged nearly to her navel, revealing the edges of tantalizing curves. She took a breath through those parted lips, and her chest rose. Gav could not form words. "Gavarax, a pleasure," she purred. "I was wondering how long it would be before you called. Zarakonar said you captured the princess." He desperately tried to get his brain working again, despite all the blood having drained to parts farther south. "Princess, yes." She raised her eyebrows slightly. "Good to see you haven't changed." So he was always this much of an idiot with her. Wonderful. He swallowed, trying to either get spit or brain cells to function normally again. "And, your part?" She leaned back, looking less satisfied. "Yes, well, the lords of hell have been somewhat less tractable than your little princess was." He thought of the knife and snorted despite himself. "I wouldn't call her tractable." Her eyes narrowed. "What, did her tears get your robe all damp?" "More like her knife nearly got my robe all ventilated," he replied, though thoughts coming easier now that she was no longer pouting at him. It occurred to him that a spell to make one's enemies into idiots via the power of breasts might be immensely helpful. Then again, it might not only be a spell. It might not be a spell. It might have only been the breasts. "No one told me she'd been given hand-to-hand combat training." "Huh." A smile played around her lips. "I find myself liking your king more than I expected to. I wish my father had gotten me fighting instructors." His king, not hers. It occurred to him to wonder where she was. There was no reason to think that she was in the same kingdom, now that he thought about it. How big was this plot? He tried to stay focused, needed to keep meeting her eyes and not let his gaze drift lower. "Well, you can have him if you like. Not that I want your lords of hell in trade." "Ha!" Her life surprised him. He would have expected something throaty or sensuous. Instead, he got a sharp crack. It felt more genuine. "You poor thing, you wouldn't know what to do with them. Although some of them do seem more inclined towards your gender than mine. I don't suppose you'd be willing to help." Help have anything to do with a demon lord? Some of the lower parts of him voted that whatever help she wanted, he should very much give to her. The rest of him reminded those parts that if his soul got dragged to hell, he was not going to have a chance to collect on that debt. The evil sorceress who wore seductive robes when she hadn't even expected a call would probably not let him collect on the debt, even if he survived. And if she did, he wasn't sure he would survive that as well. "I have every faith in you," he said hastily. "I am sure you have it well in hand." She raised one elegant eyebrow, and he realized the double meaning far too late. Apparently, he still had blood left in his head. His head now deciding to push it into his cheeks instead of his brain. She laughed again. "A suggestion. A pity. I would have loved to see you trying to collect demon seed." His cheeks ached. There. I thought you were getting uncharacteristically coherent." She tapped a fingernail thoughtfully. The long, pointed tip had been painted the same emerald as the rest of her robe. "My apologies," he said, trying not to sound too strangled. "I'll try to remain more witless in the future." "I get plenty of witless," she replied, "and the ones who keep their wits tend to be dangerously cold bastards like Zarakonar and Zaxus." So you're saying I'm not dangerous? He didn't feel particularly dangerous, but he did feel a little offended by his former break on his former self's behalf. There, dear, you're terribly dangerous. She would have patted him on the head if she could have reached through the mirror, he was sure. His ears did burn, but he gave her his best nonchalant shrug. I'm not quite as Arakonar. Her lips tightened a bit. No one is. Thank the darkness for that. Not a fan? That's hardly relevant. She didn't meet his eyes, though. It's relevant if we're all partners. He couldn't read the glance she shot him. Are we? All of us? He shrugged. There were deep waters here, he could tell, and he didn't think he knew how to swim. I certainly can't speak for Zaxxas. But yourself? He shrugged again. You know Zarakonar. Zarakonar doesn't take me seriously. Her eyes narrowed. He can't see beyond the dress and the hair. And you think he takes me seriously? Gav pointed out. He at least trusted you to go after the demons. He trusted me with gathering a princess. Who apparently has teeth. Not that any of us realized that, and then for the sake of pride, he felt compelled to add, and it's not like it got her very far. She dismissed the point with a wave. So, what exactly are you proposing? Had he proposed something? He hadn't meant to propose anything. Although, now that he thought of it, if he couldn't think of a situation where it would be a bad thing to have allies, and if he had to choose between Valavina and Zarakonar, he was inclined to go with the one who had a sense of humor. They both scared him, and he trusted neither, but Valavina... We're just going to go with Valvina. Valevna. I don't know. Valevna seemed like she might be able to be won over in the right circumstances. I'm not certain yet. Biding our time, then? Keeping eyes open, at least. If he doesn't much like or trust us, then why involve us in the first place? She had started to look intrigued, but now sat back, looking less impressed. Because he didn't have a choice. Because each of us could get him something he needed that he couldn't get himself. Right, something was off here. He couldn't quite picture Zarakonar lowering himself to collecting demon seed, it was true. But surely he could have retrieved a princess himself. There was a catch he wasn't seeing. So what happens when we give it to him? We weren't going to give it to him until the actual ritual, but her eyes narrowed. Unless you were stupid enough to plan on handing her over ahead of time? No, I'm not that stupid, he said, hoping that was true. But if I were him, I just don't trust him. None of us trust each other. We're dark wizards, she pointed out. Still, she looked unsettled. Well, I'm not offering you the keys to my workshop, he said, but maybe I am offering to share information if something seems odd. Wrong. I might be willing to consider your offer, she answered, so much hedging. Talking to other dark wizards was exhausting. And in the meantime, what will you do while you wait? He waved his own hand. Oh, some research, this and that, and prison warding, of course. Ah, yes, have fun with her. Not too much fun, though. Of course not. She tilted her head, amused. You seem different. The bottom dropped out of his stomach. Different how? Well, you've managed nearly the entire conversation looking at my face, for starters, she said. What excuse could he possibly offer? The princess had some interesting things to say the other day. I've been doing some thinking. The princess? She raised her eyebrows again. Are you playing with your food, dear? He shrugged. His new signature gesture, it seemed. castle's mostly full of goblins. One becomes very weary of meaningless conversation. She's surprisingly intelligent. For a woman? Even he could see the danger posted all over that question. For an inbred Skyan, you'd expect to have been raised only to be decorative and make a good marriage. Apparently not. He had escaped the trap. Apparently not, indeed. Well, don't get too attached to your toy, she reminded him. You don't get to keep her. He nodded. Hiding dismay got easier and easier with practice. But, she trailed off thinking, and then she gave him a look so loaded with sultry promise that his mental defenses crumbled before her. If you're really that bored and looking for intelligent conversation, I might be able to oblige. If you're always quite so entertaining. Yeah. Ah, monosyllables, his old friend. They could always be there, even when all the other concepts of functional linguistics deserted him. The mirror flickered out, and for a moment he just sat there, grateful not to be wearing constricting trews. Then he leapt to his feet and closed the connection, flinging the cloth safely over the mirror. He backed away and collapsed into his chair. Just see how long we've been doing this. Oh, we've been doing this for a while, so that's an okay spot to stop, but we're just going to check real quick. Doot, doot. Yeah, there's no breaks coming up, so that's a decent spot to stop, and we'll do it again later.